What's up, guys? Welcome back to another one of my YouTube videos, and in this YouTube video I'm also going to be doing random crap. So yeah. YouTube.
Opening YouTube for Android TV.
Okay.
The hot, crispy filet o fish. You either love it or you haven't tried it yet.
Mix and match 2 for $6, filet of fish or 10-piece McNuggets. Don't forget to add fries and a Sprite.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Whether you're a professional auto technician or working in your home garage, Harbor Freight has...
I think we should look at this chart. This chart shows the budget of the U.S. government agency called Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. You can see that they're pretty well funded, around $10 billion a year. I looked up this chart because ICE has been in the news recently.
ICE agents detained some 1,600 illegal migrants on Tuesday.
Raided this meatpacking plant.
Rounding up workers, 20 to about 100 people detained without explanation
Into
And
handcuffs.
taken to detention centers.
ICE is a kind of immigration police. And long before Donald Trump, at the very beginning of when ICE was created in the early 2000s, the agency had a very ambitious goal to deport everyone they possibly could, to, quote, remove all removable aliens. They share the same parent agency as Customs and Border Protection, which focuses on the border. ICE focuses on this, the interior.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials wasting little time under the new administration.
arrested nearly 1,200
Large-scale immigration
building was surrounded by federal agents.
Different targets on
Some
this
immigrants
one.
detained over this past
Nine single adult females, 4 female heads of
and
household.
5 members of his congregation
And
detained.
if you look at this line, you will see that indeed ICE arrests have spiked since Trump took office. And a big way that the new Trump administration has sold this surge in deportations is crime.
Murderers, drug dealers.
Violent criminals and vicious gangs.
We have to get all of these criminals.
Known terrorists.
A lot of the public messaging from the new Trump administration focuses on immigrants who are criminals.
The American people don't want these criminals and dangerous individuals on our streets anymore.
But let's separate this line into 3. This color is immigrants who are convicted criminals. This line is arrests of people with pending criminal charges. And this line is ICE arrests of people with no criminal record at all. This is the steepest line of all. So, what's going on here? That's what I'm setting out to understand by making this video. What does all of this represent? And if Trump has been able to do all of this with ICE's current budget, what happens next year when Congress has set ICE's budget to look more like this?
A major infusion of funding to carry out President Trump's deportation agenda.
Most intense spending spree on immigration enforcement in modern
History of the United States of America.
More than most other countries' military budgets.
What does ICE plan to do with all that new taxpayer funding?
To understand all of this, I've been talking to immigration experts and lawyers. I've reached out to people in my community who are facing deportation and threat of being detained by ICE.
Yo pedí permiso en mi trabajo. A mi jefe le dije que no pudiera trabajar porque no sé, me sentía tan insegura, con miedo.
When I lived in Tijuana for 2 years, I heard a lot of stories of people who were deported. I've worked closely with people here in the United States who are undocumented or unauthorized, but who have been here for decades. And I wanted to understand their perspective as well. There's so much more to the immigration system than ICE. And eventually I want to make a broader video about immigration in America more generally. But today I'm focusing on ICE. Now, reporting on this is really challenging right now because it's so divisive and emotional and charged. Clarity and multiple perspectives is vital, which is why I am partnering with today's sponsor, Ground News, who I want to tell you briefly about. I use their app and site to pull thousands of stories from all around the world and
to California in '93. I was 8 years old.
That's Daniel. He's about my age. For most of his life, he's lived in the United States. Actually, right here in the DC area where I live.
I learned to do carpentry. I learned electrical. I learned HVAC. I started my own company. Well, I had up to 4 employees working for me.
Daniel's story is one of thousands that are happening right now in this country, and we're going to get back to it once we better understand the mechanics of our system. For now, I'll tell you that this summer, Daniel was deported.
When Trump was saying that he was going to deport illegal criminals, it really didn't bother me because I was legal and I felt like I was going to be okay.
His story will make a lot more sense once we understand the basics of how immigration enforcement works in this country. Immigrants. Often they are talked about in one of 2 statuses. Foreign-born people who are here legally or illegally, and that there's some clear line between them. But that's not actually how it is. There's actually a whole rainbow of types of statuses that immigrants can have. Some people born outside the United States become U.S. citizens. Naturalized is what we call it. And then on the other side, you have undocumented or unauthorized immigrants, here without permission. And then you have all of this in between, like immigrants who lack documentation but do have the government's permission to be here. They're typically waiting for some sort of court hearing, like the many people seeking asylum. There are other people who are in the United States that are here legally but temporarily, like for example someone here on a visa. And then there's lawful permanent residents. They're not citizens, but they're allowed to be here long term. We call them green card holders. And by the way, we kind of made up this visual. This is a simplified, fairly simplistic version of all of the different immigration statuses. It's actually way more complicated and convoluted. Anyone who's in the middle of that process knows that immigration in the United States is a fairly broken and out-of-date thing, even for those who are here legally. And everyone kind of agrees on that. Republicans, Democrats. Congress may change it someday with new laws, but for now, we're stuck with old laws, and it's up to the president to enforce those laws in different ways. But for now, we'll work with this. Because Daniel, for most of his life, was here on this chart. He was a lawful permanent resident, a green card holder. The first big thing that is happening here in the new administration is that while immigration enforcement has focused a lot on these illegal statuses, people up here also have a place in this new crackdown. Each group here represents millions of people. And the people down here that don't have legal status represent somewhere between 10 and 15 million people. Let's answer the first big question, which is, how did most of these people end up living here? Now, we could start this story anywhere in American history because America is a story of just waves of immigrants. But for our purposes here, let's start in the early 20th century, early 1900s. Look at the western United States. There was a lot of land out here, but there are not a lot of people.
The need for workers for the economy is a persistent theme in American immigration history.
So once or twice a year, the farms here need a lot of workers to help them harvest and process a huge amount of food that's grown here. That need for seasonal temporary labor is filled by Mexican workers for a lot of decades. Laborers who come up just to work for the season and then return back home after their work is done. And for a lot of the 20th century, this is actually legal. The US encourages it with a specific program because they know that the US economy needs it. This flow of seasonal migrant labor, mostly from Mexico, fuels entire industries in the United States who rely on workers coming from Mexico to do this essential low-wage work and then returning back home for the season. If you live in the United States and you eat lettuce in the winter, it is almost 100% certain that that lettuce came from around here, and it was very likely harvested by migrant labor. Okay, so let's get back to the early 20th century. There are Mexican workers coming up for the season, and this is totally legal. But then in the 60s, that changes. Congress does its job. It used to do its job back in the 60s and pass laws that, like, they negotiated and compromised and actually, like, bipartisan laws. And they end this program, in part because labor unions and rights groups saw it as abusive and exploitative.
There was a lot of very well documented and well-known labor abuse that took place.
And partly because some economists were arguing that bringing in all of this low-wage labor made wages lower for everyone, and that instead American labor should go fill those farm jobs.
The constant flow of foreign workers into the available pool of domestic workers.
And so the Congress doesn't actually implement any immigration law that will allow low-wage workers to come into the country legally. They want Americans to fill those jobs. And the Congress is kind of running a big experiment, a big test. If they make this practice of migrant labor that is so ingrained into the American economy by this point, if they make it illegal, will people stop coming? Will those jobs actually be filled by Americans? And the answer is no. This flow of workers continues. The need for these workers continues, and so the flow of those workers continues. The difference now is that it's not authorized by the government. And a lot of them, instead of go back and forth across this border, which is now technically illegal, end up just staying in the United States.
So what happens is that the undocumented population grows, starting loosely speaking in the early 1970s.
By the end of the 80s, there's 4 million undocumented people living here. Many of them are filling the demand for jobs that brought them here in the first place. A very real demand on farms, in construction, in restaurants. 4 million undocumented people living in the United States. Congress sees this as a growing problem, so they decide to get tough on immigration.
Scholarships you may qualify for. Visit gcu.edu/myoffer.
Brushing isn't always easy. The pressure never feels quite right.
Congress wants to enforce immigration limits in a firm, unambiguous manner. They passed laws in the 80s and 90s to physically fortify this long, porous border. Physical barriers, more guards, incentives to leave, disincentives to enter. Okay, so this first test that they ran back in the 60s didn't work. Will this work? And the answer is no.
People say, oh, this might be my last chance to cross. I better cross, and I better, as soon as I can, I better bring my family with me.
In fact, more people come because, again, there's jobs here. There's jobs to be filled. There are corporations who have become totally reliant on these workers. So soon, some of these migrant workers are now not so migrant. They're having families here. They're living lives. They're paying taxes. They're integrating into communities. They're American. By the end of the 2000s, there's 10 million. But they don't have legal status. They're not technically authorized. And in fact, no matter how important they are to certain industries, there's no path for them to gain legal status. They're in this limbo. Look at this chart. These are farm workers in the United States. These two lines are for people who are either born in the United States or legally here. And this line are unauthorized immigrants, the people we've been talking about this whole time. Now watch what happens. The undocumented population is around 3 to 4% of the entire American population. But look at how fundamental they are to just the crop farm work industry. This is the food we eat being processed by people who are not authorized to be in the country. Oh, and by the way, it's not just agriculture. Landscaping, household workers, laundry services. Again, 3 to 5% of the population, but a quarter of this workforce.
This is an example of a gap between what the legal system provides and what seems to be what the economy needs to function at a high level.
I once worked at a restaurant as a line cook here in DC. It was my first job when I got out of college, actually. And every single person in that kitchen was an unauthorized immigrant who worked usually 2 jobs cooking food for restaurants. Now, I want to dwell on one point that I kind of mentioned, but is incredibly important, which is that normally policy would recognize this. Oh, there's a need for low-wage work in the United States. Let's make a legal pathway so people can come in and we can sort of control this. But immigration in the United States is kind of like this room with 4 doors. Each door is a legal path into the United States. If you're a high-wage worker who has like a advanced degree or whatever, you can get in through this door, though that's a nightmare in and of itself. You can get sponsored by family who are here legally. You can play the lottery, where less than 1% of those apply, get status. And then there's the asylum refugee door for those fleeing danger or persecution. What a government that oversees an economy that is reliant on migrant labor might do is make a 5th door. A door for low-wage workers who do all of these vital jobs that we all rely on. But there is no door. There's no door for construction workers, farm workers, restaurant workers, hotel cleaners.
Most Americans think that if you're a good person who's been following the law relatively well, paying your taxes, and contributing to the community, can just simply apply for citizenship.
No, that is not how it works.
The lawful pathways to come to this country have never really been able to satisfy the demand for workers. And so there are workarounds for that.
So today we have this huge population of people, over 10 million, who are in limbo. They've lived here for a long time, they work here, they fulfill important jobs. They're only about, again, 3 to 4% of the population. And by the end of the 90s, remember that chart that showed how reliant our food system is on this labor? Instead of focusing on mass deportation and trying to kick everyone out, there was actually some political appetite to give these people a pathway to be here legally, a recognition that we need them. Let's let them not live in the shadows anymore. George Bush was our guy on this.
Every immigrant, by embracing these ideals, makes our country more, not less, American.
George Bush was in the middle of sort of negotiating sort of a new comprehensive immigration reform that would have legalized a lot of the undocumented immigrants at the time, greater pathways for labor migration.
It was looking very hopeful for these 10+ million people in limbo, but then something happened.
A plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
All of a sudden it became impossible to talk about immigration without thinking about security issues.
It's now my privilege to sign the Homeland Security Act of 2002.
The 19 men who carried out 9/11 were in the United States legally, and so now there was a microscope on how the immigration system let this happen, because it was so insecure. All of Bush's efforts towards make America more American, all of that took a massive U-turn.
And so there's this language of criminality that gets attached to immigration, and especially undocumented immigration.
Congress creates this new department, it's Homeland Security. They get rid of this benign-sounding Immigration Naturalization Service, and in its place, Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The country was reeling after 9/11, and a more militarized, security-focused version of immigration, border protection, was one of the ways we felt more safe. When we decided to cover this story about immigration, I reached out to all of you to ask what angles you're most curious about. What do you feel like you're not getting from the news? And I heard a lot of you tell me that you feel overwhelmed, confused, even sort of anxiety induced by the news, by your news feed. I feel that too in today's news cycle. This is why my team and I have been working on creating a new space to interact with these topics that is more about understanding and dialogue than it is about the kind of attention-grabbing, anxiety-inducing nature of our current media. This is what New Press is. Our main goal is to make our reporting more transparent and to make your experience consuming our journalism more empowering, more focused on understanding and less focused on fear and sensationalism. Help us change the way journalism is done and consumed. That's kind of the goal. And thanks to everyone who contributed your thoughts and questions to this story to make it better. All right, it's after 9/11. What happens next? So ICE is created after 9/11, and this is when we start to expand the use of detention centers, like immigration jails. Wait, but I thought ICE just deported people. If someone is found to be here illegally, unauthorized, why not just deport them? And the answer is the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment, which says that every person here is entitled to due process of the law. Every person, not every citizen. Every person gets a trial. They get their day in court to represent themselves, and we got to abide by it. It's the rule of law here in the United States. Though that's kind of being stress tested at the moment, as we will see in a minute. Anyway, my point is that detention centers are, in many cases, where migrants awaiting their hearing and their trials are held. They're jails. Did you know that there's a difference between prisons and jails? Jails are just meant to hold people temporarily while they await some process. Prisons are meant to punish people who've been convicted for a crime. Detention centers are kind of supposed to be like jails. They're supposed to be temporary and not a punishment. Okay, so now we are post 9/11, ICE exists, it's a new era of immigration. And since the creation of these agencies, Congress hasn't passed any major immigration reforms. It's been up to the president to enforce the laws that exist, that were made all those years ago. So let's see how Obama chooses to do this.
I believe that we can be a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants.
That quote kind of sums up how Obama did it. He wanted to pass laws around immigration and actually make like some legal form for people to have a pathway to citizenship or to permanent status, but he also wanted to show that he wasn't soft on immigration. And in fact, he soon becomes known as the Deporter-in-Chief, a nickname that he earns by deporting a lot of people. He deported a lot of people just at the border who were coming, but then he also used ICE to deport people from the interior. And Obama was really all about focusing on criminals, people who were actually like a threat to society.
And let's be honest, tracking down, rounding up, and deporting millions of people isn't realistic. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families. Criminals, not children.
This is something I didn't know before reporting this story, and it's super important. During this time, the principal way that ICE would find people to deport wasn't just going in and like raiding a workplace.
In order to understand ICE operations, you have to understand that historically speaking, for the last 20, 30 years, the primary source of ICE arrests has been people who are held in local jails, or state jails or federal jails.
ICE would rely on the local police in some town. There might be a lot of undocumented immigrants in this town, some of whom have criminal records, but this one got arrested and is at the local police station. They call ICE, ICE goes over, picks them up. But over time, local police stations started to push back on this. They're like, hey, we're local law enforcement. We're not like immigration enforcement. It created all this mistrust in these communities where now people without status would be afraid of the local police because a small run-in with the police could mean deportation. So some police departments stop playing ball when they have someone in custody who doesn't have immigration status. These are called sanctuary cities. I'm going to be totally frank. I used to think sanctuary cities were like cities where immigrants could come and there would be zero like immigration enforcement at all, and that like ICE couldn't come into. I now understand it for what it is, which is they're cities where local law enforcement treats undocumented immigrants like anyone else. They don't hold on to undocumented immigrants for even longer just so that ICE can come pick them up. If they can make bail, they get to go, just like anyone else would. So Obama's deporting tons of people, and meanwhile, there's a larger conversation happening around immigration. Part of that conversation led by this guy.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems. You can call it whatever the hell you want. They're gone.
Trump runs a campaign that is highly antagonizing of immigrants, really framing them as criminals, and he wins. One of the first things he does is he changes how ICE can arrest people. Instead of them focusing on people who are in police custody already or who have a criminal record, ICE is now authorized to pick up anyone who they find along the way who might be here illegally. This is called collateral enforcement.
Where you have officers going after people not because they are a high priority, but because there are more of them than the people that are high priority.
This is kind of, I think, when a lot of us learned what ICE even was. ICE raids become much more visible under the first Trump presidency.
Nearly 24 law enforcement agents surrounded this suburban Texas home, raided convenience stores, checking papers.
Arrest more than 100 people at once.
ICE officials said operations like these are a harbinger of what's to come.
The other big theme of Trump's first presidency is how he got shot down by the courts over and over. He tried to do this Muslim ban, and the judicial branch, which is the courts, found it illegal, and he tried to tweak it, and they found it illegal, and he wasn't able to fully exercise his vision on immigration because a lot of what he wanted to do was technically illegal. He tried to cut federal funding from these sanctuary cities. Once again, it's found illegal by the courts. He's not allowed to do it. He tries to end the program called DACA, which gives protected status to a few 100,000 people who came here as children, but once again, blocked by the courts. So you can kind of see that Trump V1 was not very successful in this sort of widespread crackdown on immigration that they envisioned because they didn't have their legal house in order. They were pursuing things that were just blatantly illegal. But they would learn from this. Trump's policy architects would learn from all of these mistakes, and they would be ready next time. But here comes Biden.
President-elect of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
Biden wins, and boom, look at this graph. People are coming to the border, partly because the notoriously anti-immigrant president is now out of office. And that's what this chart is.
You had people showing up at the border truly believing that Biden had said any immigrant could come here, but also because COVID destabilized the economic situation in a lot of South America, and the United States survived COVID economically better than any other country in the world.
Many of them are deported, but for logistical and diplomatic and legal reasons, many are released into the United States while they wait for a hearing. Remember this status? At the same time, Biden also keeps a Trump policy that expels many new immigrants without even processing them, many of whom start making repeat crossings.
You had large numbers of people just crossing the border over and over and over again until they could get through. So the rate of repeat border crossings skyrocketed.
So a lot of these numbers are actually juiced by thousands of people getting turned back multiple times. Same person, but they just keep coming.
Some say the new president gave them hope for a life in America.
And these images, this graph, becomes the central tool for Donald Trump's second run for president. The day he almost got assassinated, he's like showing the graph.
Take a look at that. And then the worst president in the history of our country took over.
I'm going to get
And
the
look
pizzas
what
cooking
happened
now.
to our country. Probably 20 million people. It's a massive invasion at our southern border. The invasion at the border of our country. Invasion of our country. Bad things are going to happen.
Check out this poll, which asks Americans if they think that legal immigrants are a, quote, major risk for committing a crime in the United States. In 2019, it's like somewhere between 15 and 20% of people who say that legal immigrants are going to commit a crime. By 2024, it's like double that. Like a third of Americans are now skeptical and afraid of legal immigrants.
We have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. They're having fistfights with our police officers right in the middle of the streets.
14,944 have been convicted of homicide. They're taking over the city. They're taking people's pets and killing them and eating them.
Okay, real quick. I almost had an entire section of this video that is like the deep dive, scientific evaluation of the data of the migrant crime connection. Is there a surge in crime committed by unauthorized immigrants, as the news is kind of making us feel? Instead of an entire section, because I think it will be slightly tangential, I'm going to give you the highlights. The answer is there is no question that people who are in this country without authorization sometimes commit crimes. But if you look at the data, not the news stories that are sensational and horrible, the actual data, you will see something like this.
5 hospitals: Butler Memorial, Clarion, Frick, Latrobe, and Westmoreland.
Looking for the right path after high school or a fresh start? Westmoreland County Community College invites you to discover your future at our spring open house on Wednesday, March 25th from 3.
Lots of studies that show that undocumented immigrants are far less likely to commit crimes than native-born Americans. They're half as likely to be in jail. They commit violent crime at a meaningfully lower rate. In fact, there's even pretty robust studies that show that an increase in the foreign-born population is associated with less property and violent crime in a community. I'm going to put the link to the studies here and some of the stats in our sources so that you can go evaluate them for yourself. Okay, but most Americans aren't looking at the data. They're watching this.
A murder committed by a man in the country illegally from Peru.
An undocumented farm worker.
Another undocumented immigrant accused in a gruesome crime.
So Trump rides this wave. It's like his central message in the 2024 presidential campaign. And he makes a big promise.
The largest deportation operation in American history.
And then he wins.
Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States.
I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before.
And this time, these people are ready.
In the first Trump administration, they kept losing. They had poorly drafted rules that judges struck down. And you learn from failure.
On his first day in office, Trump declares a national emergency on the border. He sends the military there, he freezes the refugee program, he suspends asylum, he revives an 18th century war law to justify deporting gang members. He makes it way easier to just deport people without due process, which you can do through some loopholing, some like maximalist reading of the law, no hearing. He directs immigration judges to look for anyone who is in this limbo waiting for an asylum hearing and to fast-track deny them without a hearing to get them deported faster. He rolls back temporary protected status for a few 100,000 people, tells them it's time to go back to their country. He revokes student visas, and he offers $1,000 for any undocumented immigrant to self-deport. They literally call it a exit bonus, which sounds like a HR corporate America term, which I guess is not surprising. He says that anyone who is meant to be deported and doesn't go will get a fine that is $1,000 a day. His goal is to deport 1 million people in his first year in office. But he has a problem. This chart. People, unsurprisingly, have stopped coming to the border. Now remember Obama, the deporter-in-chief? He deported tons of people, 400,000 people at the height. But a huge amount of those people were from the border. There's barely anyone coming to the border now. So to get his 1 million deportations this year, he needs to focus on the interior, all of this. In other words, he needs ICE.
Federal agents launched raids in one of the first visible signs of President Trump's mass deportation plan.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement will no longer avoid sensitive locations like schools and churches.
Now anyone is fair game for enforcement and to be detained and deported from the U.S. If you're in the country, you're on the go.
First things first, he once again revives this authority for ICE to pick up anyone they stumble across when they're doing an operation. Like if they're going after like a drug dealer that they know is an actual criminal, if they find anyone along the way that doesn't have papers and that they have a reasonable discretion to think that that person is going to flee, they can detain them. But ICE doesn't have enough people for all of this at first. So Trump starts taking people from other agencies, other law enforcement agencies, thousands of federal workers from the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the U.S. Marshal Service, thousands of people doing important work of law enforcement now being reassigned to pick up unauthorized immigrants. And where do they turn? In where they can. Restaurants.
They're coming here with guns and then their faces are covered.
Factories.
Anxious relatives of employees waited for updates.
A child's birthday party. saying that they're targeting gang members, but detaining people as young as 3 years old.
It remains unclear how many of those arrested are actual gang members.
And they're not just focusing on strictly unauthorized, undocumented immigrants. They're arresting green card holders.
He is a legal resident. The agents took him to a cemetery and beat him several times.
They're deporting people to countries that they're not even from. They're deporting people who are following the rules and going to their hearings, who are entitled to due process by the Constitution.
ICE detained 20-year-old Dylan Contreras, a high school student, on May 21st after attending a mandatory immigration court hearing.
This is the chart of ICE arrests. Here's where Trump takes office. You can see how things spike. And this gets us back to Daniel.
Before him being elected, he was talking about sending all of the illegal criminals back to whatever country they were from. But in my mind, I wasn't illegal. I was legal. So, to be honest with you, I didn't really take it too serious.
In March 2025, Daniel was detained. He was a green card holder, remember? Had been here since he was a kid. He was a business owner, an employer, but technically, he had a record.
I did get in trouble as a teenager and found a little joint of marijuana in the vehicle.
So even though this was decades ago, it didn't matter. He gets put into a detention center that is run by a private company while he awaits a hearing.
Food is really horrible. The milk is already spoiled. Like as soon as you open it, like you can smell the pieces of bread. It had mold. I lost 35 pounds in less than 2 months. Like mentally, they were breaking me down. I said, I feel like I'm gonna die.
Immigration jails are wretched places to be, so much so that I don't think it's possible to have a fair immigration court process while you're detained, because so many people just don't have the psychological fortitude to maintain that for the months it takes to fight your case.
The showers were nasty. It would be flies, mosquitoes all over. The facilities are dirty. They don't give you no sheet covers. You sleep on the floors, on the overground, not no mattress. The officers will tell me, hey, listen, they tell us that you guys don't have no rights.
Now, hold on, due process still exists. Trump hasn't destroyed the Constitution. Daniel had a really good case for being here. He had a green card. His wife is an American citizen.
I couldn't fought. I spent so much money on my lawyer, and I couldn't stay there and fought for a year.
But this is actually the most pernicious part of the whole story. Even though he could have fought his case in front of a judge and probably won, his lawyer told him that to just work through that process would take months, maybe even longer than a year. But things were so bad in this detention center that he calculated that this was an unbearable amount of time.
The government and ICE know very, very well that it is in fact so punishing and awful for people to endure that they will often be forced into giving up their rights and simply agreeing to be deported.
The living conditions were so bad that I basically asked to get deported myself.
I talked to Daniel right after he had arrived to El Salvador, after being detained and then deported.
Well, I'm still trying to adapt to the heat over here and the way people talk, because everywhere I go, they know that I'm not from here.
And I started to get really curious why he was a target. Green card holder, business owner, and then I put it together. It comes down to the numbers. Even after this huge initial crackdown right after Trump took office, they still weren't hitting their numbers. This is way too hard. This is when Stephen Miller, who's seen as the architect of Trump's immigration crackdown, gives ICE a quota.
We are looking to set a goal of a minimum of 3,000 arrests for ICE every day.
3,000 arrests a day. I don't actually know if that's a lot or little. I wanted to put this into perspective. So let's just sort of compare it to something else. Like New York's police department, they're pretty big. They probably do a lot of arrests a day. Well, it turns out they arrest about 700 people per day, and they have about 36,000 officers. This is officers, this is arrests. ICE has about 6,000 officers focused on their deportation efforts, and they have to arrest 3,000 people per day. Okay, that's a pretty big number.
And what we understand is that the pressure those line agents are feeling to make as many arrests as they possibly can is unimaginable.
So starting this summer, just a couple months ago from when I'm recording this, we started to see the results of that quota, of this pressure.
ICE detained him because they thought he was part of the protest and he was just driving through.
A woman was arrested in front of her children as she was about to take them to school. A chaotic face-off between federal agents outside the facility.
They broke his car window right there, pepper sprayed him in the car.
Let's go back to this graph that we started the video with. Remember our three colors: convicted criminals, people charged but not convicted, and then no criminal charges. That's this bottom line. Trump takes office here, all of the lines go up. Stephen Miller gives ICE their new quota here, and look which line goes up. To meet these quotas, ICE is leaning further and further into finding anyone they can justify deporting. And just recently, these lines crossed. Okay, but here comes the problem that we maybe could have predicted if we were listening to the first half of this story, which is the U.S. economy needs these people. There are industries that rely on their work. And business owners, corporations, a key part of Trump's fans, start to get really angry that Trump is raiding their workplaces and deporting their workforce. So here he is coming out with a Truth Social post saying that his aggressive policies are taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being, quote, almost impossible to replace. Like, if you thought I was being, exaggerating about how vital these people are to certain industries, Donald Trump himself is corroborating that. Almost impossible to replace. That same day, there's an email that goes out to ICE supervisors telling them to stop it with the worksite enforcement operations. Stop with the worksite raids on agriculture, restaurants, and hotels. And it tells them to stop arresting non-criminal collaterals, jargon for the people you find along the way when you actually have a target. Let's see what happens next to our graph. Well, this line, arrests of immigrants without a criminal record, slows but continues to go up. They still have to meet their quota, and everyone is still a target.
Incluso me despierto a veces todas así con el corazón realmente. Pues yo creo que nos vinieron a buscar.
I talked to Maria, not her real name, who is one of these people that are now a target. She's been here for decades, she's raised a family here, she works, but now her life has been made impossibly anxious.
Ahorita sí es un caos completo porque, digamos, al salir, por ejemplo, yo tenía la sensación como estar vigilado, como perseguido.
Because now Maria is going through a massive rebranding by this administration.
You are, by definition, a criminal, and so therefore you are subject to deportation.
For years, the population was seen as necessary and legally allowed to enter and work. And then for decades, the government kind of just turned a blind eye, knowing that we needed them. But now, they are seen as criminals. Yes, there's the talk of the worst of the worst.
The American people don't want these criminals and dangerous individuals on our streets anymore.
But it's not about that. Look at this line. No criminal record. The administration is undergoing a reassociation to rebrand this giant population of people as every one of them a criminal, every one of them fair game to be detained and deported.
Yo soy sincera que no he dormido. Digamos, por ratos duermo, por ratos no. Mi hija, la mayor de ella me dice, mami, no te preocupes, pues nos tenemos que ir, pues vamos. Pero la verdad, decía ya están mis padres y todo, pero no fue tan fácil estar aquí.
Is this new? I was struggling to frame this in history. Like, how unprecedented and different is this? And then I found this quote that says, the theory that immigration is responsible for crime, that all newcomers should be regarded with an attitude of suspicion, is a theory that is almost as old as the colonies. Okay, how do you back check that? But then I realized that this report was written in 1931. Those words were written in 1931. Like, even back then, 100 years ago, people knew how powerful the trick this is. How easy it is to brand outsiders as criminals.
We are not going away. We are staying here to liberate this city from socialist, burdensome leadership, families showing up for immigration hearings, being detained by ICE agents right after. People pepper spray bounced outside the ice facility.
Federal agents slamming a 79-year-old business owner to the ground.
A mother to the ground. ICE agents shoot and injure a woman.
Homeland Security says its operations are about immigration laws, not instilling fear.
So, here's where we're at. Congress has just passed this law that will juice ICE's budget. That term. We're about to see a much more resourced version of this crackdown. The result will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives turned upside down. It will mean families ripped apart. It will mean communities ruptured. People who, yes, among them are some criminals, but that's not who they're targeting. And that's at least what their own data says. And instead, an administration that is headed by the son of an immigrant is directing our government to kick out a huge number of people who, as we've seen, are a key part of our economy and our country.
Every immigrant, by embracing these ideals, makes our country more, not less, America.
Sí, es frustrante, entonces mis padres me han dicho que mejor me regrese, que estoy entre la espada y la pared, porque sí me gustaría, o sea, como le dijera, ya me acostumbré, pero es que si seguimos así no es vivir una vida.
The only way to really stop migration is to make the United States no longer a desirable destination. And as Trump pushes this message of Fortress America, a world in which if you cross illegally, we might send you to prison in El Salvador on false claims of gang membership. People are not viewing the United States as the beacon of freedom that they once did.
In America, we live by a set of rules. Most days, we don't even think about them.
But when those rules are broken, when leaders use the power we gave them against us,
when our communities feel less safe and our most fundamental freedoms are threatened,
The ground under everyone shifts. This is not all of America, but we can take it back. They only get away with this if we let them.
I know what I'm doing. I know how horrific it is. Whenever I taste Cinedust, I know I do it all again. Must Cinedust.
Hey Holmes, find me a 3-bedroom home in Atlanta, near a Whole Foods. Show me the kitchens. Ready to see what you will find with Holmes AI?
If we took all of the gold that has ever been mined in all of human history, put it all in one place in a giant cube here in Washington, D.C., it would look like this. Oh, this is it. I mean, it's pretty big, but I kind of thought it was going to be a lot bigger. So what's all this gold even used for? Well, 45% of it is used for like decoration and jewelry. You got necklaces, you got earrings, you've got this giant Buddha that's just solid gold. There's an old Egyptian coffin made of pure gold. Largest gold coin in the world, got a kangaroo on it. It's 45% of all the gold. You got a small portion of all this stuff that gets used for industry, stuff like the fillings in your teeth or electronic components that use the special properties of gold to work. But then a huge portion of all this gold is just sitting in vaults around the world, mostly in New York and London, in the form of bars, gathering dust. Governments and investors have been on a gold buying spree lately. I mean, look at the price of gold.
President Trump is seeking more control of the Federal Reserve.
Gold prices soared to a record high after U.S. President Donald Trump criticized Federal Reserve.
Russia and China have been buying a lot of gold bars. And Florida is trying to make it so that gold can be used as real money again. It seems like gold is having a comeback. But actually, what I'm learning is that it never went away in the first place. So how did all of this gold get here to Earth? Well, a lot of the gold that humans mine came to us on one of these, an asteroid loaded up with heavy metals that formed from exploding stars. If you zoom into one of those metals, you'll see some really weird-looking atoms. The electrons are moving nearly the speed of light. This absorbs the blue light and reflects the yellow and red light. Look, it's yellow. It's shiny, like the sun. No other metal does it quite like this. These gold deposits sat in Earth's crust for billions of years, undiscovered. Some rivers dug in, eroding the Earth and revealing these pieces of shiny stardust. It caught the eye of some humans who noticed it was different.
Found this shiny rock that they dug out of the ground that they could turn into things that it didn't tarnish.
It was a dense metal, but it was somehow soft and workable. It didn't rust. It was incorruptible. Was it eternal?
Gold has chemical properties that have proven to be very interesting and useful to many societies across many centuries. And some of those properties have to do with its purity, some of them have to do with its malleability, some of them have to do with its indestructibility, and some of it has to do with aesthetic intrigue.
From China to the Andes, people independently fell under gold's spell, at first for decoration and celebration of their rulers and their gods. Indian healers made medicine with it. To the Inca, gold was the sweat of the sun. They covered their temples and adorned their faces with it. The Greeks made statues. King Solomon plated his temple with it. And 6,000 years ago, this guy was buried with a gold bracelet, with beads, with a scepter, with a sheath. Oh, and not for his sword, but for his... Yeah, I guess it was pretty valuable stuff. Chinese emperors ingested gold, trying to become immortal, which, spoiler alert, doesn't work. But as humans gathered in larger and larger groups, empires grew, they became greedy and hungry for more land, the story of gold starts to evolve, helping kick off one of the most significant psychological inventions humans ever came up with, the invention of money.
It's a commonly accepted medium of exchange. People are willing to accept it. In early societies, one of the most common things was cattle.
Yep, we're talking about cows. We'll get back to gold in just a sec. Let's go inside the human brain to see how money evolves. So yeah, instead of just trading something I want for something you want, humans started settling on commonly useful things that they could carry around and that would be valuable to most people.
Historically, lots of objects have served as monies. We have barley, salt.
Cows were something that many people needed for food. They were transportable because they could walk. They were pretty easy to retain because they ate grass.
This is the most obvious version of money. Something that is practical and useful. It'll help you survive. But they also have drawbacks. Cows don't make good money. That's a weird sentence I never thought I would say. But yeah, they spoil, they're hard to divide, you can't easily bring them to faraway places to do trading. So eventually, humans found something better. That shiny, soft metal pulled from the riverbeds. It was easy to shape, to split up.
So it's easy to carry around, it's easily divisible.
And it just looks cool. And humans love shiny things. So that was like a nice added bonus. It was rare, but not too rare. Like there was enough of it, but it wasn't like everywhere. Which like that's an important part of this. But gold doesn't feed you. It doesn't keep you warm. It doesn't shelter you. Yes, you can make jewelry and like a dagger out of it or something, but like it's not that intrinsically useful unless we introduce a very powerful ingredient to the mix. It's a very human ingredient called bismuth. This guy believes gold is valuable, and so does this guy. If someone believes that gold is valuable, and so does another person, that belief turns metal into a system. He trades it for wheat. I'll give you gold, you give me wheat. You then take that gold and go trade it for salt or fabric. Gold becomes valuable not because of what it does, but because what we believe it means. So this is a big psychological step for us. From cattle, which has utility, to gold, which has no utility but is scarce, durable, divisible, universal, and, don't forget, fancy shiny. And all this is made possible because of collective belief. Belief that if I have this metal, I will be able to go use it to buy things that help me survive. And if everyone believes it, then it works.
Gold and silver became the dominant monies throughout the world.
Collective belief can turn metal into money. As a collective, I believe that we can change a broken media ecosystem into something better. Me and my team have been working on a new chapter trying to build a place for community-led journalism. You can join the waitlist at newpress.com to get early access as soon as it's ready. But for now, we're talking about gold. So, the belief in gold spreads throughout the world a few thousand years ago, not just as a thing that we do to worship the gods, but as a means of trade, a currency, a money. This also happened with gold's forgotten cousin, silver, It just didn't get those fast-moving electrons too much. There's actually much of it, too. Anyway, soon gold was being stamped into standardized coins, being used as a near universal form of money all around the world. It was magic, but it was also mania. When the Spanish landed on the shores of modern-day Mexico in 1519, they met the Aztec civilization, and one thing caught their eye: gold. Lots of gold, including these gifts that the Aztec king was presenting to these Spaniards, giving it to them for free. The Aztecs were using lots of gold, but not as a currency, but as decoration, for worship, for armor, for blades. It wasn't economic, but to the Spanish, gold had become economic, a means of trade. It was wealth. And here it was, in extreme abundance, and they wanted it. Or, in the words of one Spanish conqueror, we suffer from a disease of the heart that can only be cured by gold. The Spanish ended up massacring the Aztecs with their weapons and their diseases. They took as much gold as they could find, these statues and masks and jewelry and blades, melted them down, shaped them into uniform units of value, and stamped them with a seal of authority. They spent the next century ripping through the Americas, chasing every rumor of golden cities and sacred wealth, places like El Dorado, Cibola. Men fevered by greed for this shiny metal stuff, fueled by conquest and spoils that built their cathedrals, and ended up kicking off a race among the European empires, a race for more and more gold.
Let's not forget what the Spanish found when they came to the New World. Gold.
And then, of course, this leads to a cottage industry of renegade sailors, sometimes hired by other empires, trying to intercept these ships going to and from the New World with hopes of finding one of these chests full of gold. Now, I was disappointed in my reporting when I discovered that most pirates weren't actually after gold and didn't find a lot of gold. They were after more boring stuff like lumber. And they didn't really have these X marks the spot type maps where they buried their chests of gold. That's mostly a myth, but it's also kind of a useful example of how gold inspired these big, grand stories of adventure, of jackpot, how it enlivened the imagination and inflamed this greed in people's minds. I mean, I get it. How sick is the idea of a bunch of gold that never rusts, buried somewhere in the Caribbean, ready to turn a peasant into a count? Crazy. God, I love the Count of Monte Cristo from the early 2000s. So by the 1800s, this psychological leap is complete. There is a near universal belief in gold as a currency, a means for exchange, the universal money. The European empires had already torn across continents in search for it, and now it was the turn of regular people, the dreamers, the risk takers, the desperate men who joined the hunt for gold, men with nothing to lose, chasing rumors of riches, and doing pretty reckless and extraordinary things, all for a shot at striking gold. A big group of them in 1849 fled into the western United States, helping build California, becoming the 49ers, all in search for gold. These guys are in Canada's Yukon, where it is very cold, and they're looking for gold. I mean, this happened everywhere. South Africa, Australia, the Amazon, each place the same story. Men intoxicated by the idea of getting rich off of gold, doing whatever it takes to get their hands on this stuff, even forcing others to mine it for them. This frenzy of hope, chaos, migration. It was gold fever, and it didn't just mean entire populations. It was, as the writer of this excellent book puts it, a murderous, cruel, intoxicating, brutal adventure that swallowed an entire civilization and spat it out as coins. And I love when rigorous historians write beautiful language. Okay, let's dive back into the brain really quick and see what's going on next. Hold up. This is actually a perfect time for me to thank today's sponsor to get my goal so that I can run this company. And it's actually something that I use. It looks like this, Global Threat Protection. Boom, I'm in. So NordVPN used to just be a virtual private network, a VPN that allows you to connect to the internet via another country. These days it's a lot more. It's more and more like a threat detection tool, a dark web monitor. It's basically an all-around tool that allows you to connect to the internet and be safe from a whole host of different threats that exist online. Threats to data, threats to your identity, threats to your computer itself. It blocks sketchy sites, phishing links, malware, even fake online shops. I mean, I still use it mostly as a VPN, like when I'm in other countries, I connect to the internet via the United States so that my computer doesn't freak out and like make me do a bunch of two-factor authentication. Also, I can watch stuff that isn't available in other countries sometimes. But yeah, it is this very easy tool that kind of just works in the background. You're not like pressing a lot of buttons. It's very easy to get the value out of this. It's very affordable. The dark web monitor, you can go out and check to see if your credentials have leaked into hacker forums and they alert you right away. So it's just a generally good tool to be connected to all of the time. You got Auto Connect enabled, that just works in the background. Threat Protection Pro is what you're looking for here. This is especially useful when you are at like a public Wi-Fi, like a cafe or an airport or something. So if you go to nordvpn.com/JohnnyHarris, that helps support this channel when you click that link. It also gives you a huge discount on the 2-year plan, plus 4 extra months. Again, that's nordvpn.com/JohnnyHarris. Thanks, NordVPN, for sponsoring today's video. With that, let's dive back into the brain and keep telling this story about gold. It's about to get real juicy. We're about to take another big psychological leap here. The leap from a belief in this soft, shiny metal to a belief in paper.
One of the problems with physical gold is that if you want to trade it in large quantities, it's pretty heavy to carry around a lot of gold, and what people decided was if they could deposit their gold into a bank, it would give them a banknote, which was essentially an IOU. 1 ounce of gold was worth approximately $20. So basically, if you had a $20 bill, you could go into a bank and redeem it for 1 ounce of gold.
Most individuals, when they got paid, they got to pay envelopes stuffed with banknotes. So that was the everyday medium of exchange. As long as you trusted that the banknotes were good, you really didn't think about much which bank had issued the notes. They all exchanged one-to-one against each other and against gold and silver dollars.
If you wanted gold instead of the banknote, you could come in and redeem the banknote and they would give you gold.
See what scholarships you have qualified for. Visit gcu.edu/myoffer.
He's hungry for a breeze. And you're hungry for these. Wowza, Jimmy John's is toasted. Oh, a new big hero out of nowhere. We have some secret right now. Shut up. All right, toasted sandwiches at Jimmy John's. Oh, that's good.
Big Razor said, no one besides us can pick up a premium dividend razor. Harry said, hold my beer. New Harry's Plus with an advanced dividend system. It's the shave I've been waiting for.
Are you telling me that this isn't a
Alaska.
You made it? I got it! You did it!
The future of home shopping is here, and it's only on Homes.com. Introducing Homes AI.
Welcome back. How can I help?
Homes, please find me a 3-bedroom home in Atlanta. I love to cook. Show me the kitchens. Narrow it down to homes walkable to a Whole Foods. Ready to see what you will find with Homes AI?
So now instead of believing in gold, we are believing in banks trusting them that if they give us this piece of paper, it actually represents the gold that they are holding safe in their vault. And that at any moment, if I needed the gold, go to the bank, get the gold. That is now a pretty far abstraction from cows, something that feeds us. We're now carrying around paper. But, once again, it follows the same rule that if everyone believes it, and if the banks don't give us any reason not to believe it, then this worthless piece of paper turns into economic power, a currency. And in fact, if we can do that, it's really convenient. It makes trade way easier. Theoretically, everyone thrives here. So, silver. Okay, yeah, instead of gold in the vault, a lot of economies had silver in the vault, and a lot of economies were trying to have both metals, giving them each a specific value and pegging that value so that it wouldn't change too much. But this becomes a problem. It's really hard to have two metals as the foundation of your paper money. And then suddenly, if there's a big discovery of silver in Nevada or something, there's way more silver, so it throws off the value of silver, but it's pegged to the value of gold, and so all this arbitrage happens. This was a huge, decades-long debate here in the United States. It got really political. We've got this guy running for office, mostly on a platform of silver, and some people think that The Wizard of Oz is an entire commentary on this debate between gold and silver. And while reporting the story, I was multiple times very tempted to go down this rabbit hole. This is a video about gold, not about silver. Sorry, silver. So we'll save that one for another day. And indeed, by 1900, gold, this shiny metal that humans have been using for thousands of years to do trade, endured as the one metal that we would base our entire economy off of, at least here in the United States. But a lot of countries too. We set a firm standard. $20 gets you 1 ounce of gold. There's a finite number of gold, it doesn't fluctuate too much. Anyway, this is called the gold standard. And the United States and a bunch of other big countries were on the gold standard in the early 1900s. Okay, let's get back to the human brain because we're about to go through our third massive leap in the psychology of money. Let me warn you, this one's kind of weird, and I went to college for this one, monetary policy and economics, and I'm going to do my best to explain it, but it starts to get a little bit wacky. We're also entering some controversial territory. Economists, who are much smarter than I, debate this stuff, what I'm about to say, and they all have different takes, and have strong feelings about it. So, I'm going to do my best here, but in the comments you're going to see some strong opinions. I welcome them, just be nice. So it's the early 1900s, banks have gold in their vault. They give you a piece of paper that says you're entitled to the gold in the vault. But it turns out human beings are struggling to adopt the paper thing fully.
There are a series of financial panics. We probably don't want to get into the causes of the panics. The banks have a limit how many banknotes they could issue. So when people wanted more currency and they couldn't get banknotes, they would take gold and silver coins out of the bank vaults. And now the banks are losing reserves. Now they have a problem.
So here they all are, at the same time, rushing to the bank to pull their money out, all at once. This is not good for an economy that grows when you give banks money to lend out to other people and trust that not everyone's going to try to take it all out at the same time. I made a whole video about this, how modern finance and credit works and how that multiplies the money supply in these weird ways. You can check that out. But for now, just look at this picture of a bunch of people on Wall Street trying to get their gold out and know that this is not good for the economy. So the U.S. government decides that having all of these decentralized private banks who are giving out paper money is just too prone to these vulnerabilities, to everyone going to the money at the same time. So they decide to make one bank to rule them all, aka the central bank, aka the Federal Reserve, aka the Fed. We're just going to call it the Fed from now on. Why did the U.S. government decide they needed to centralize this around a single bank?
It's a federal institution that will cope with potential panics and shortages of currency and shortages of back reserves.
The Fed would be the big bank that would be given a bunch of power to set the rules for the rest of the banks.
By issuing more currency when it's desired.
That was still technically pegged to the gold standard. But a huge difference was now you couldn't just go to the bank and exchange your paper for gold. And the Fed would be in charge of controlling how many of these banknotes were floating around the economy.
And so in the United States, we have the Federal Reserve that is the monopoly provider of dollars.
Which in turn determines how the economy works, how people spend money, how people borrow money. And their goal at first was just to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So, and this fancy machine that the Fed has. It's not a literal machine, this is completely symbolic. Don't overinterpret the analogy here. So, to be clear, we're still on the gold standard at this point. It's like 1913 or something. Every 20 bucks is pegged to an ounce of gold. But now, the Fed has all of these levers to play with. These levers that invisibly incentivize people to borrow money, interest rate, to spend money. And with their new power, the Fed starts fiddling around with all of these levers. Hey look, if you lower the interest rate, more people will borrow money, they'll spend money, they'll start businesses, more jobs.
Many critics have said that they kept interest rates below where they should have been. They made credit too abundant, and so you had an overinvestment boom in the 1920s that, although there were genuine investment opportunities due to technological change, electrification, the automobile, things like that.
Wow, look, it's an economic boom. It's the roaring 20s. The stock market just quadrupled in 5 years. Times are good, thanks in part to the Fed pulling some of these levers. Though this, like many assertions I'm about to say, is kind of debated. Try not to get sucked down the economic debate rabbit hole here. So things were good in the 1920s, maybe a little too good. Uh-oh.
The Fed over-amplified that boom and raised it to an unsustainable pitch.
The bubble burst, the good times ended, and the U.S. and the rest of the world falls into a Great Depression.
Money supply, early years of the Great Depression, starting in 1930, there are bank runs that drained a lot of the gold out of the banking system into individuals' wallets and under their mattresses.
Again, we made a whole video about what recessions and depressions are. Check that out. Okay, but watch what happens here. One of the very important levers that the Fed has on this symbolic machine is to put more money into the economy. And we do this through a bunch of different indirect mechanisms. But the result is there's more money to go around, and borrowing money is cheaper to make the interest rate go down. So it doesn't cost that much to borrow money. During the Great Depression, most economists agreed that the Fed should have done this. So why aren't they using this? It's the Great Depression. People aren't spending money. People are losing their jobs. Lower the interest rate. Get more money into the economy. But look, they can't really do that very much. The money supply is fixed to gold.
The Fed started to issue more notes. It could reach a point where it was constrained by not having enough gold to back them.
If you lower the interest rate, then people are going to borrow a bunch of money. But then what if they show up to the bank with all that money and demand gold bars in exchange for their paper? They might do that. Everyone's kind of panicky. So the Fed is envisioning this nightmare scenario where all of their gold goes away and the whole system falls apart. So instead of lowering the interest rate, they hike it up. They defend their gold. The historians who debate this stuff don't agree on all of this, but they do agree that this course of action made the whole thing worse, made the Great Depression last a lot longer. 10 years of misery.
So the Federal Reserve, instead of saying, hey, we made a big mistake, we shouldn't have caused this bubble in the economy, they said, you know what, we need even more power to control the money supply, and that's what happened.
That resulted in the president coming out and saying, hey, the gold standard really just screwed us over. We weren't able to pull all of our levers because we were pegged to this obsession with being backed by gold, so let's be done. Enough is enough. We need flexibility in a crisis. And if you want to go way down the technical rabbit hole, look up the unholy trinity. That's a very technical explanation of what's going on here. All the sources are in the description, as always. So it's 1933, and FDR comes out with an executive order saying that Americans need to turn in their gold bars in exchange for flimsy dollar bills. And the government could now print as much or as little money as they wanted to guide the economy's behavior to keep it humming along and hopefully keep prices stable. Now we don't have a finite thing called gold that is like there's only so much of it, because now you just have an infinite thing called dollars and a central bank who can effectively print as much of it as they want. The more they print, the less each is worth, so prices go up. That's inflation. Anyway, let's go back into the brain, because this is like the biggest psychological leap of them all. Money is still belief, but without the gold standard, the belief is in the government, in their paper, even if it's not backed by anything. It is a belief in the government's ability to run this machine properly. This is called fiat money, and it's a whole lot different than cows, where we started. Starting in 1933, this is how money was valued in the United States by a decree from above. Now, full disclosure, I went to Brigham Young University, studied econ and studied under a school of thought that was very much like pro-Fed. The Fed, fiat money, is sort of like the best thing we got going. It makes mistakes sometimes, but like better than gold standard. I intentionally talked to two economists for the story who were like a little more skeptical of that take to kind of help balance me out. My hope is that the story I just told you about this moment in time is a fair characterization. But if there's any professional economists watching, I would love your take on this. Like, I would love a good faith critique or like alternative view or whatever. Like, economics is not science, it is psychology. And so we get to debate endlessly. So, gold is out. And so what, are we at the end of the road for this shiny metal, this thing that humans have loved forever? Not so fast. So, 1944, World War II is winding down. The U.S. is realizing that in just a matter of years became the most powerful country in the world and defeated the two rising empires and was now on top of everything. So they get all of their allied countries together, a couple dozen countries, in a hotel in the mountains of New Hampshire with the goal of designing a new global economic system, a set of rules that everyone will play by. And the U.S., of course, takes the lead on what this system will look like. They propose that instead of creating some universal global currency, as some were proposing, the world should instead opt for the US dollar to become a universal, globally accepted currency that everyone else's currency would be, like, attached to. And the rest of the countries are like, it's kind of sketchy that we're just trusting you and your dollar. And the US says, okay, but remember, all of our dollars are still backed up with gold. Normal citizens can't turn it in for gold, but we promise to you countries that all of your dollars can be turned in for real gold bars, $35 per ounce. You can come to us and exchange it for gold whenever you want, and we promise we'll keep it in the vault. Speaking of the vaults, look at our vault. This is Fort Knox. It's in Kentucky. This is where we keep our gold, and we have a lot of it now because a lot of you all, world, gave us your gold in exchange for weapons we made for you during the war. So, the dollar is king, and we'll back it up with gold. Take it or leave it, guys. And they indeed took it. And the dollar became the king of global trade and investing. And gold was once again at the center of our concept of money, but not for long. Turns out the U.S. couldn't keep its promise to back up all of its dollars with gold in its vaults. They were printing more money, they were giving it out, and the world catches on. And some countries get kind of pissed.
Until finally, there were so many dollars that they started to redeem them. Germany and France in particular.
Like France apparently sends a Navy ship in the 60s to show up to New York to be like, hey, we're going to give you our dollars, we want our gold.
And the Treasury ran out of gold, and we chucked it out the window in 1971.
I directed Secretary Connell to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
And finally, the president at the time, who is President Nixon, comes out and is like, okay. Yes, we don't have the gold anymore. You got us. But guys, come on. Be reasonable. We're all used to using the dollar by now. The whole global economy is used to this. We're America. We've proven that we're stable. You can trust us. I mean, look at our economy and look at our military. We are safe and stable. Use our currency. Invest in our government, and you can sell those bonds whenever you want. We'll give you dollars, and you can use that to buy like oil and whatever you want in the global economy. We promise we're good. And the world, without much choice, was like, okay, fine. And just when we thought we couldn't get any further away from cows, here we are. Our concept of money takes one more bonus step to here, where so much of the global economy runs on a currency that is built off of collective belief in a story, in a system, in an S with a line through it. In 19 people who sit in a fancy white building in Washington, D.C. and try to accurately predict the future and make decisions to pull proverbial levers to ensure that the dollar doesn't lose its value in all of our minds.
Grand Canyon University. This is purpose-driven education. Visit gcu.edu.
It's here, the party shop at Michael's Balloon Bar. Choose from over 700 balloon styles and free helium on select styles. Celebrating is easier than ever. Michael's, everything to celebrate anything.
Tough jobs demand even tougher power tools. The Hercules 20-volt brushless platform from Harbor Freight is rigorously tested by professionals to make sure your tools work as hard as you do. Hercules combines power, durability, versatility, and value with the universal 20-volt battery system that powers every tool. Discover why so many Milwaukee and DeWalt.
So have they done a good job? Well, a lot of people say yes.
People from the Fed would say, look, you've done a great job. The Federal Reserve is better than putting this into the private market like we have in the Fed.
That being able to create new money in the economy helped us recover relatively quickly in the 2008 crash or during COVID. But a lot of people say no, that the Fed does a terrible job.
But I think the evidence says that actually they have not been very good. The Fed basically caused the Great Depression.
That inflation is out of control and that the people running it are never faced with the consequences for not doing a good job. Several economists I talked to think that it's a lot of power to put in a government agency that isn't incentivized by the free market. But most monetary economists, the people who study this stuff, like the vast majority, think that, hey, the Fed's not perfect, doesn't get it right all the time, but like this is the best version of a modern, complex economy, and it generally works.
What you described as the Fed has made some mistakes, but we can't imagine living without it, that's probably 90% of the econ profession, maybe higher. But everybody now has grown up in a world where it's hard to imagine what things would look like without the Fed. And it's especially hard to imagine once you're on a fiat money standard. If you're on a fiat money standard, somebody has to control the quantity of fiat money. And if it's not a central bank, how do you do that?
I'm actually not going to have an opinion on this. I'm still kind of making up my mind. So let's wind this video down by getting back to the central question at the beginning that we started with, which is, why are people buying gold again? Why is this happening?
The price of gold is near an all-time high. Have you seen the price of gold lately? It was up more than 13% this year.
So since we've gone totally off the gold standard since 1971, and in fact even before that, people have started holding gold as an equity.
Despite all of these mental leaps and these vast abstractions of economic value, here we are, turning back to gold. First off, foreign governments never got rid of their gold. The U.S. still has huge stores of thousands and thousands of tons of gold in Fort Knox and other facilities, and so do a lot of other countries. A lot of countries store their gold in the United States, in New York City, in this gold reserve that is buried like 50 feet into the bedrock of Manhattan, and just sort of sits there, gathering dust and being a little reserve, a just in case type of thing. But a lot of regular people, investors, buy gold too, whenever they start to feel a little bit sketchy about the big psychological bargain they've made with the government. All of this is pretty, actually, kind of squishy. It's very mental. All of this requires us to believe, but over here really requires us to believe. And even trust our U.S. government and our economy, and recently that trust has been waning. America has rival nations that are trying to get the world to stop trusting the dollar. They want to replace it. They don't like how much leverage it gives the U.S. The U.S. economy and government have also been kind of all over the place recently. The stop and go tariffs from the Trump administration's first few months in office got people really spooked. Like, we can't really trust these people with our entire sense of value in our currency. And now that Trump is attacking the Fed and threatening to control it, people are turning to gold in a bigger and bigger way. And, or at least for now, while I'm recording this, there seems to be some trepidation about people believing in the dollar. So that's why you see this going back in time on the psychological leaps.
In the last few months, well, since the start of the Trump administration, there's been a loss of faith in the dollar vis-a-vis other fiat currencies. People are worried inflation may go up either because of real shocks like the imposition of tariffs.
So people are rushing to other stores of value that don't rely on the central government. The shiny metal, gold, is one of them, but there's another currency that people are opting for that kind of looks a little bit like gold, at least mentally. That's why it's actually really gold. It's becoming really good to physical gold.
I think a lot of young people are comfortable with digital assets and digital currencies and switch over to Bitcoin or something different. Either one of those things would provide a check on the Federal Reserve because people would have an alternative and the Fed would know that they created too much inflation.
Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies may represent a future path
for
psychological journey.
There you go, your pizzas are done.
But it's usually too early to tell.
Yeah, they're all done. I've been waiting for you to come up. I thought you were coming up.
You wouldn't
get the first
one. And currency.
That called me and said,
yeah, I know when the first one's done.
They're all done.
No, I said when the first one's done.
Well, they're all three done. They're cut up on a plate waiting for you to come eat.
Oh, no one told me.
I didn't know what happened to you.
Oh, no one told me.
They're all ready for
Oh,
you.
no one told me.
Huh?
Well, no one told me. YouTube.
Opening YouTube for Android TV. See what scholarships you may qualify for. Visit gcu.edu/myoffer.
There's people getting rich off this graph. What we're looking at here is the number of Americans that don't make enough money for basic survival. So like a family of four, 2 parents, 2 kids, living off of $31,000 a year or less. That's considered poverty in the United States, and there's millions of people who live with that kind of income. The U.S. government spends about $1 trillion every year helping these people meet their basic needs. In recent decades, a lot of that money has been flowing through a middleman, private corporations who are supposed to be more efficient in administering this money.
So welfare is big business. And of course, that's the irony of this whole thing. There's so much money to be made from poverty.
Now, this is not easy stuff to understand. We're talking about government welfare programs and bureaucracy. And they're intentionally hard to understand. These corporations don't really want to be known by anyone. But if you start to dig, which we've been doing, and you look deep enough into this, you start to see what all of this actually looks like, who's actually getting rich, what the incentives are within the system, where the loopholes are, and whether or not this is actually benefiting the people that it's designed to benefit. So in this video, I'm going to show you who gets rich off the poor, and I'm just going to do a few case studies that demonstrate how this works. I'll be making a list of examples here from what I see as the least egregious abuse of this system to the most. I am bracing myself to get sued or intimidated by the companies that I'm calling out in this video, because that's how a lot of these powerful shadowy companies work. So as always, every assertion in this video is rigorously fact-checked, and in my sources, lawyers, go check that first before you send me your cease and desist order. Thank you. And with that, let's look at who gets rich off the poor. Let's go back to this graph one last time and just zoom back to the 1950s, where you can see that the poverty rate was double what it is today. It's like 22%. This was really bad, and it led to the president at the time declaring war.
On this administration, today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America. We shall not rest until that war is won.
So, A War on Poverty by Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964. This is what that war looked like. This big line. This is social spending as a share of GDP. You can see this is where he gives this speech right here, this flat line. Social spending just skyrockets right after. The government spends tons of money for this war on poverty. That money goes towards programs like Medicare and Medicaid, food stamps, public education, which is why you see this big dip. 22% all the way down to 12, 13%. And for a time, all this spending worked. Poverty declined 30% in 5 years. But eventually, progress slowed. The government kept spending, and people got tired of it. The economy wasn't doing well, and people were tired of subsidizing these welfare programs. And that's where this guy comes in.
Friends, some years ago, the federal government declared war on poverty, and poverty won.
This is where things start to get a little bit murky, so we needed help. We got it from Ann Kim, who is an expert who literally wrote the book on this history and the modern day poverty economy, and sat down with us to talk through this history and how it works today.
I remember during the 1980s, we had this, well, no, you were in the 1980s. Well, during the 1980s, there was really this mythologization, if that's the word, of the CEO. At the same time, the government spending was ballooning. Economic times were not good. So Americans were not being particularly generous about funding social services programs. And so the CEOs were really kind of held up on a pedestal as the ones who were going to make government just as efficient as they made their own companies.
Poverty is a big business here in the United States, and the government is making decisions right now that will affect millions of people. And yet, what I've been finding is it's hard to keep up on all of this, how this stuff is being reported, and what is trustworthy and factual. Lately, Medicaid portals have been shutting down in all 50 states, thanks to a Trump administration funding freeze. This could result in millions of Americans, low-income Americans, going without care. This is huge, and it's not really being reported on. When there's no accountability, bad policies can go unchecked. I'm saying all of this because it has to do with the sponsor of today's video, who is more important. Doesn't rely on corporate influences to decide what you see. And if you want to join the platform, you get 40% off the Vantage plan, which has all of these features I talked about today. You get 40% off if you use my link or scan the QR code. round.news/JohnnyHarris is the link. It comes out to be like $5 a month for this, which to me is an affordable price to be better informed and to have a more critical view of the news you're consuming. So sign up now, round.news/JohnnyHarris. Thanks Ground News for sponsoring today's video and for existing. Okay, back to our list of who gets rich off the poor. So it's the 1980s. Reagan wants to rein in all of this spending. He's also afraid that Americans are becoming too reliant on the welfare system. So he kicks off a bunch of changes that over time would lead to a fundamental shift in delivering income support to low-income populations.
We want to privatize Medicaid, Medicare, prisons, air traffic control.
This privatization of government spending started under Reagan, but it continued in the future administrations, especially under Bill Clinton, who helped expand it. And the fundamental shift looks like this. We're going to be using a graphic like this, not only for right now, but for the future cases of how this works today. Taxpayers give money to the government. The government used to give money to citizens in need directly. But after these reforms, the money would start to be distributed to the states. The states would then hire for-profit companies to do the complicated work of distributing this money to eligible people in need. They'd be responsible for making sure that no one's abusing the system, determining who's eligible and who's not. And the thinking here was that the government is much less efficient than private companies, and that is true in most cases, and that if we apply business and the free market and profit motives to welfare, that the for-profit companies would make this more efficient. Less government spending, less waste, and less over-reliance on the welfare system. And the big part of all of this is that there would be more requirement for people to be looking for a job or be working in order to qualify for benefits. And who would verify that applicants are actually working? These for-profit companies. And so this is how our welfare system works today, in a very kind of American way. Is administered by private companies that you've never heard about, who are given lots of money from the government to dole it out to people in need.
So Reagan started this privatization train, and it was really President Bill Clinton who not only hopped on board that train, but got it accelerating to its destination, which was total privatization of a lot of social services in America.
So that's the context here. It's been 45 years since this big experiment began of privatizing our welfare system. And I've always wondered, did this work? So that's sort of been the curiosity at the heart of this story. Is government more efficient? Are we saving money? Is this helping vulnerable populations in a more efficient way? The answer is, in some cases, yes. Like, there have been positive outcomes of outsourcing to contractors within the welfare system and public spending. A good example of that is food stamps that used to come in these paper coupons, but now are delivered electronically on a debit card. This is more secure, it's more efficient, and ensures that people use these for food. There are a lot of instances where private companies have made government spending more efficient, but the purpose of this video is to shine a light on the many instances where private companies have gotten really rich off of this system in a way that has not benefited the most vulnerable and needy people in our country, the poor, the elderly, children in need, the disabled. So, finally, the reason you clicked on this video, let's draw up this list of who gets rich off the poor. And for that I'm going to need, look at all these papers, so we need more space. Let's go to the big table. Okay, so the first one on our list is slightly adjacent to the privatization of welfare, but it follows the same incentives in many ways. It has to do with taxes. One of the ways that the government subsidizes the lives of lower income people is through a tax credit. When you file your taxes, You show that you've been working, you've made money, but you didn't make that much money, and therefore you qualify for an earned income tax credit. If you have kids, it goes up, and it kind of maxes out around $7,000. This is a very simple thing. In a lot of countries, you like check a box and you get this refund or this subsidy to your life. But in the United States, it looks like this. This is a 45-page instruction manual about all the specifics on the earned income credit, something that should be so simple and that is a key way of helping lower income people live their lives. The tax code here in the United States is deathly complicated, intentionally designed to be so, to make certain companies rich. And this is one way that works. I've had a lot of feelings about this. I made a whole video on the New York Times about this very thing, but I didn't focus on this aspect of it. Because it's so complicated, low-income people who qualify for this credit don't want to fill it out themselves, and so they go to a tax preparer. Enter this guy. Well, not this guy specifically, but a guy like this, representing a company like this. Liberty Tax is one of many tax preparation companies that advertise to low-income people to come in so that they can prepare their taxes and get them in on the earned income tax credit. But we now know they do so using some pretty shady means. There's a lawsuit. Lawsuit. District of Columbia versus Liberty Tax Service. Liberty Tax was recently sued for luring low-income people by saying that they will prepare their taxes for them, only to deceive these customers by secretly skimming extra money off the top of their tax refund, which remember includes the earned income tax credit that is meant to subsidize their lives. Liberty Tax also gives out loans to people, saying that they can pay them back once they get their tax refund.
But what that really has done is create a market for high-interest cash products like refund anticipation loans or refund anticipation checks, which are basically just payday loans that are secured by the refund. And so this predatory industry has grown to take advantage of complexity for an incredibly important benefit that a lot of people can count on every year.
These loans would often come with high interest rates and unexpected fees. In fact, the pricing in all of this has been kind of a black box, allowing Liberty Tax to take advantage of low-income Americans trying to get in on the benefit that they are entitled to because of this tax credit. Okay, and this is where I have to come clean. I worked for this company. Not for very long, and not in any high position. I was one of the Statue of Liberty guys. One winter I was home from university waiting for a security clearance for an internship at NATO, and I needed money. And so I found this job, being the Statue of Liberty, holding this sign. I didn't know what the sign said, okay? But it probably said something like, need money today? Apply for a $500 to $6,250 easy advance.
Business evolves fast. Our students are ready. Learn more at WGU.edu.
Every dinner comes with a side. There are sides that stretch, that stand out, that is humble, and disappear.
Are you telling me I'm not good? And you're telling me I'm not black? What am I?
I'm Nate Mooney, and I'm a black dude.
In other words, I was probably a part of luring desperate people in to get a bad loan or to have their tax refund skimmed by this corporation. I had no idea, I'm sorry. Liberty is just one of many corporations who has gotten in on these schemes, targeting low-income people who try to get in on their tax credits. And to me, this is actually a failure of our tax system. For this segment of the population, this should be a very easy thing like it is in every other country. A box on a free government website that you fill out in 5 minutes. But instead, we've got a privatized corporate middleman who is making all this money off the poor. Okay, number 2, housing. So here in the U.S., instead of building big public housing complexes like they do in some countries and like we used to do, the privatized version of the American government gives vouchers to low-income people and allows them to go choose a house, and the government will basically pay for a portion of their rent. This is called Section 8 housing. And there are landlords that specialize in renting to Section 8 tenants, getting this government subsidy voucher that goes to pay for the rent. But what you find is that some of these landlords jack up their prices because they know the government will pay for it. Like here in DC, an apartment that should cost $1,600 a month, the landlord might charge almost $1,000 more, $2,500 a month, well above the market price, knowing that the government, who has poor oversight of this program, won't pick up on this and will subsidize subsidize that inflated price. Now, I'm not just making this up. Those are real numbers from an investigation here in D.C. by the Washington Post, who found that the D.C. government is overpaying thousands of apartments to the tune of $1 million every month. Here in Little Rock, this is happening all over the country, enriching landlords while depleting the assisted housing fund, all while distorting the market. Like, this is not free market. This is a totally distorted thing. Number 3 on our list is corporate middlemen, which is kind of a big section. I'll try to work through it fairly concisely, but it's kind of the biggest one here. This is where a lot of people get really rich. Remember from our history section just a few moments ago that Ronald Reagan shook up the welfare system by, instead of giving money directly to people in need, instead giving it to the states, who would then give it to a corporate middleman who would then distribute it. And that corporate middleman also had to kind of determine the eligibility of people, making sure they're working or looking for a job. And all of that is a lot of work, and these corporations were the ones to be doing it.
So these are the folks who are getting government contracts to act as government in running welfare programs. They're basically agents of the government. They're mercenaries for the public sector. They're making huge decisions that benefit the everyday lives of low-income people. One of these companies, for instance, was a company called Maximus, which is one of the largest welfare services providers today. They had revenues of about $8 million in 1995, and just a few years later, their revenues were already at $500 million. And today, they're a $4.9 billion business.
Now, this was exactly the point for Reagan and his reformers. These corporate middlemen were supposed to be much more efficient in administering this government. And indeed, they are for-profit companies, and they operate much more efficiently than the government itself, cutting costs and looking for ways to do things more efficiently. But let's remember, this is not like a normal corporation like McDonald's that is selling a product to a customer that can go somewhere else. Let's see what happens. A few years ago, Maximus took over Tennessee's health insurance program, state-run health insurance program called Medicaid. And what you saw is that many children and elderly people very quickly were booted out of the program. They were found ineligible. There was a 23% increase in the number of uninsured children in the state. That's more than any other state at the time, 2018. It took me a while to get my head around this. Why would a for-profit company want to take children and old people off of the state health insurance program? I'll explain in just a sec, but let's look at one more example. In 2016, Maximus took over the Medicaid program in Kansas. And soon thereafter, applicants started to see huge delays in their applications. Backlogs started to build up. Which, remember what we're talking about here, this isn't abstract. This is vulnerable people, in this case, mostly elderly people, not being able to access their basic health needs for weeks and sometimes months because their application was pending for a very long time, meaning Maximus was working on it, but presumably very slowly. And that's because children and low-income people and elderly people are not Maximus's customer. They do not have an incentive to serve those people, partly because those people can't go anywhere else. Those people think that they're interacting with the government. They don't know who Maximus is. And mostly because their main job is to get more government contracts and cut costs so that they can capture as much of that government contract as possible. So in this case, what that means is cutting staff, making it as cheap as possible to process these applications. This answers my question about why a company like Maximus would want to get people off the rolls, to deem them ineligible for these benefits. Because it's cheaper for them. They are motivated to find people who do not qualify and to pare down their list so they have fewer people to work on, which is less cost for them. So yes, there is cost cutting and efficiency that's happening here, but it happens to be at the expense of vulnerable, needy people the government is trying to give money to. Now actually, I don't blame Maximus very much for this. I don't think they're bad people. I think they provide a very useful service in most cases. We should expect a corporation to behave like this. The definition of a for-profit corporation is someone who does everything in their power to make money for their company. That is their job. So without proper oversight and competition and regulation and performance review, these corporations should be expected to minimize the resources they have to put into processing applications and administering benefits. And another point of fairness here, if you look at the financials of Maximus, they're not some crazy profitable company. Yes, they bring in billions of dollars. They've captured a huge amount of this government services market. Their gross profit margin is 20%, which seems like a lot. But if you actually look at their net profit margin, which is kind of the more typical profit margin, it's like 3%. That's a pretty poor performance for a company. They're not insanely profitable. The CEO did make $7.3 million last year in full compensation, and they did spend over $1 million in lobbying and funding elections. My point here is corporate middlemen who administer welfare are not robber barons, and they're not running some corrupt scheme, but they are for-profit corporations who will cut costs where they can. And if they're not held accountable for doing that, the people who suffer are the people who are already vulnerable to in our country, which is what all these programs are meant to help.
Because they're one of only a handful of companies that are in this business, we can get away with a lot of behaviors that may not fly in a more competitive marketplace.
I remember interacting with these companies. I didn't know I was interacting with them until I started reporting the story, but when my son was 1.5, he was diagnosed with autism, and we started to look around for services, realized our insurance didn't cover anything, so we went to Medicaid, and we qualified. And my wife spent hours and hours on the phone with what I now know was a corporate middleman, trying to work through these applications and processes, and it was mind-numbingly complicated and difficult, and the wait times were so long, and the paperwork and the hoops that we had to jump through. And I remember feeling a lot of anger at the inefficiency of the government. The government has no incentive to perform because we're not their customer. What I realize now is that I was dealing with a corporation. I was not the customer. His was not the customer. My son Henry, who needed services, was not the customer. In fact, complicated forms and more wait times and process is actually more business for these corporate middlemen. They have an incentive to sell more paperwork to all of us. To me, that is a distortion of what Ronald Reagan dreamt about, of corporations swooping in and making our government more efficient. Okay, that's corporate middlemen. Let's move on to number 4. Medicaid dentists. Now, I've had some positive experiences in Medicaid. When I was a freshly married, in my young 20s university student with no insurance, and we had our first baby, I got hit with a $10,000 bill from the hospital and freaked out and went to the billing department at the hospital, and they told me about this magical thing called Medicaid for someone like me. It was very limited at the time. And lucky for me, whoever the benefits contractor in Utah was handled it very well, and it really saved my baby. But if you look at all sides of Medicaid, you start to see entire industries that exist to take advantage of the Medicaid system. A good example of this is dentistry.
It's created an enormous business opportunity for some dentists who see that they can make a living treating exclusively Medicaid patients.
Unlike regular private insurance, Medicaid doesn't reimburse very much for dental procedures. Because of that, a lot of dentists don't take Medicaid insurance. And on the other side, there are some dentists that only take Medicaid, specialize in appealing to patients who qualify for Medicaid, getting them in, and doing as many procedures as possible to get in on those Medicaid benefits. And once again, if we're talking rational corporate behavior and incentives, these offices will often target lower income or disabled or elderly patients who are less likely to advocate for themselves and against medically unnecessary procedures.
So inevitably what's happened over time is that this market has turned into a very exploitative one, where dentists have been prosecuted for charging for procedures that didn't exist, or procedures that were completely unnecessary. For instance, there was a dentist in North Carolina who was prosecuted for having performed 17 routines on a
Stability, precision, that's the essence of driving, often.
With shopping center brands, you can see my groceries like
KC-135 is Stratotanker, and at first glance it might not look too different than your typical commercial airliner, but it definitely is. The KC-135 is a modified Boeing 707 capable of refueling other aircraft 30,000 feet in the sky. It's essentially a flying gas station. Now this aircraft is also super special to me because my dad flew the KC-135 as an Air Force pilot, instructor pilot, and later as an evaluator pilot for over a decade. So Dad...
Who's suffering? My name is Mr. Dees. And let me be blunt. No, not James Blunt. You're beautiful. No. You're beautiful. Thank you. It's been difficult for me to be positive about the future lately. Why, you may ask? Because it seems like we're living inside every dystopian novel that warned us about the future. And to be clear, when I say dystopia, I mean an imaginary society in which people have lost all their freedoms and lost their humanity and equality. Now, I know some of you are thinking, oh, come on, Beats, it's not that bad. And I'm not saying we're in a literal apocalypse, but some of the themes that these authors warned us about, they're not just futuristic anymore. They're just the present. Let's break it down. Let's go through 7 of the big ones, the most popular dystopian novels, many of which we were forced to read in school growing up. We'll go through them one by one. Oh yes, one by one. Starting with let's start with the most popular, the one that most of you are probably already aware of because people bring it up so much that it's kinda annoying. George Orwell's 1984. When Orwell wrote about Big Brother, he imagined a world where the thought police watched you through hella screens that could never be turned off. And indeed, people used to be terrified of the government putting cameras in their homes. But here's the twist. We didn't need an authoritarian government to force them on us. We bought them. We often call them smartphones, smart speakers, smart TVs, smart thermostats, smart locks, smart doorbells, smart appliances, smart lights, smart vacuums, smart baby monitors. Basically, if they have a camera and an internet connection, one could make a compelling argument that they're just like the telescreens Orwell wrote about in 1984. All of these smart devices are spying on us. Through them, giant media companies are gathering a lot of personal information about you. Even information as sensitive as your GPS location, your search history, or your heart rate and blood pressure. And then these media companies are turning around and regularly selling that personal information to who the heck knows. Hey, speaking of which, this video is once again sponsored in part by Delete Me. Hey, did you know that I get death threats? True story.
Great brands, great prices. Nordstrom Rack's got it. Up to 70% off. Shop online.
I'm trying to platinum every game I own. I recently platinumed every GTA game except... Released in 2013, developed by Rockstar North, GTA